Why the Rich Avoid the Poor. In his 1993 book, Down and Out in Paris and London, George Orwell wrote, "The trouble is that intelligent, cultivated people, the very people who might be expected to have liberal opinions, never do mix with the poor. For what do the majority of educated people know about poverty?" In his 1926 book, The Rich Boy, Scott Fitzgerald wrote, "Let me tell you about the very rich. They are different from you and me. They think deep in their hearts that they are better than we are. Let's be honest, the rich in our world don't mingle with the poor. If you go to any city, you'll immediately notice that where the rich live is different from where the poor live."
Hi there, sir. Sorry for interrupting you. Your house is probably the most beautiful I've ever seen.
Oh, thank you.
What do you do for a living?
I am an investment.
The rich go to different restaurants, different clubs, and even different churches. But what does science have to say about all of these? In a 2006 study which happened at Princeton University as conducted by the neuroscientists Lasana Harris and Susan Fisk, the participants' brains were scanned as they showed them color photographs of people belonging to social groups. Some were clearly rich, for example, businessmen in fancy suits, while the appearance of others was such that they were obviously not just poor, but destitute. When the volunteers looked at pictures of homeless people, 2/3 were prepared to admit that their immediate reaction was one of disgust, which was interesting and disturbing in itself. But what interested Harris and Fisk more were the activity in their brain. The brain scan showed that when the volunteers were looking at pictures of rich people, the medial prefrontal cortex was activated. This was in line with previous research which had demonstrated that it is this area of the brain which is activated whenever we see another person rather than an inanimate object. So to put it crudely, the gray matter flashes up a message saying, "Same species here," and that tells us that we should relate to this other thing in front of us as a fellow human being, rather than a lawnmower or a pigeon or whatever. But when the people in the scanner were shown the pictures of homeless people, the medial prefrontal cortex failed to do its thing. Yes, that's right, the brains of the volunteers didn't register that the shambling guy with the matted hair, the shapeless coat, and the broken-down boots was another human being. Instead, the areas of the brain associated with disgust were activated.
Good morning. Anything you can help us out with for breakfast or extra change? Very sorry to ask. Anything you can help us out with? Leftover breakfast.
So the simple conclusion we can arrive at here is that most of us naturally avoid people who we perceive to be hopelessly poor, which is the reason why the super rich avoid us too. But there should be more to it than such a simplistic explanation. So let's dig deeper. In the 1960s and 1970s, an Austrian psychologist, Fritz Heider, was working on the concept he called attribution bias, when he found that in ambiguous situations people made attributions based on their own needs to maintain higher self-esteem and viewpoint. This specific tendency became what we now know as the self-serving bias. Self-serving bias is the idea that individuals tend to ascribe success to their abilities and efforts, but ascribe failure to external factors. That is why if you speak with a student who scores A in biology, that's because she reads very well. But the other students who fails biology will tell you how the teacher doesn't like him or how he was sick a few days before the exam. Now, let's talk about the rich. Several studies have found that people who become rich as expected, like the student who has an A in biology, often feel that they deserve wealth, make more sacrifices, and work harder than everyone else. For example, in one experiment by psychologist Paul Piff at the University of California, pairs of strangers were invited to play a rigged Monopoly game, where a coin flip designated one player rich and another one poor. The rich players received twice as much money as their opponents to begin with, and as they played the game, they got to roll 2 dice instead of 1, and move around the board twice as fast as their opponent. When they passed go, they collected $200 to their opponent's $100. In various ways, through body language and boasting about their wealth, by smacking their pieces loudly against the playboard and making light of their opponent's misfortunes, the rich players began to act as though they deserved the good fortune that was largely a result of their lucky roll of the dice. At the end of the game, when researchers asked the rich players why they had won the game, not one person attributed it to luck, even though they were obviously rigged to win. These lucky players instead talked about how skilled they were, they did things that they did, their acumen, their competencies, etc. In the same way, people who are whining in the game of life tend to think it's because they're smart, or hardworking, or even more determined than everyone else.
We start from nothing and we manage to stand on our feet. I think by working hard, you can achieve what you want.
In the year 1774, Louis XVI became the King of France under the Ancien regime, but he inherited a failing empire. The French population had grown from 18 million in 1700 to 26 million in 1789, while Paris alone had over 600,000 inhabitants. But one-third of the population were either unemployed or had no regular work. Inefficient agricultural methods meant domestic farmers struggled to grow enough food to support the population, and as a consequence of this imbalance, food prices rose by 65% between 1770 and 1790, and wages only increased by 22%. Such shortages were damaging for the Ancien regime, since many blamed price increases on government failure to prevent profiteering. 1788 and 1789 winter happened to be the worst in the decade, and that marks the beginning of the French Revolution in 1789. Today, most historians agree that the primary cause of the 1789 French Revolution was economic inequality. You see, aside from the fact that the rich have what you may consider too much money and believe that they worked harder for their wealth, they're also likely to look down on the poor, have less empathy, and socialize less with the rest of the population. In this 2018 publication published by the Economic Times, I read about a study conducted by Pierre Detsey and Eric Knowles, in which they discovered that poorer people are more likely to notice, engage with, pay attention to, and empathize with other humans compared to the rich. This 2009 study, published by Psychological Science, found that the rich are less likely to give eye contact while talking with strangers. And this study by psychologists Emily Bianchi and Kathleen Voss found that the rich socialize less with their family and neighbors, but socialize more with their friends. For obvious reasons, right? Pierre Detsey and Eric Knowles call this the motivational difference. So you see, poor people are grossly dependent. They have to be in a good relationship with so many people because they need help. But the rich are self-sufficient. For example, as a poor person, you have to please your boss, but the rich doesn't have a boss to please. A poor person has to have good social skills with his colleagues at work, or they'll hate him, and that might lead to him or her losing his or her job.
The truth is, you're just not the right fit. Okay.
The rich don't worry about someone hating them because that will not affect their income. The poor man needs to be in a good relationship with his neighbors and family members because he might need $100 from them or any other favor in the future. But the rich won't need such help. He depends on nobody. He can even buy other people's time, sleep, and skills without caring at all about them. He is independent and self-sufficient. Hence, he can easily avoid his neighbors or family members. In her 2015 book, Off the Page, Jodi Picoult wrote, "I don't really understand this. Why, when you have so many people, each one inevitably fascinating, why would you limit yourself to only those like you?" I think Jodi's question is rhetorical, or else she wouldn't be a writer. You see, even though I've shared with you the ugly part of the reason why the rich avoid the poor, there's a neutral part to that equation, and that is birds of the same feather flock together. It doesn't matter whether you're rich, poor, Catholic, or Muslim. Generally, humans are much more comfortable around people of their kind. In fact, this phenomenon is so crazy that in Chapter 2 of his 2013 book, Intellectual and Race, Thomas Sowell wrote that if you put together 100 couples and test their IQ, you'll be surprised they have only as much difference in their IQs as you'll find among siblings. According to this 2008 study by the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships, we'll rather be friends with someone who's completely different from us but is perceived to be similar to us than someone who's like us but is perceived to be different. In fact, this 2016 study, as published by the University of Kansas, found that our desire to be with a like-minded individual is not what we learned. It is in fact, hardwired into us. If you doubt this, make a list of 5 people you spend the most time with and think about how many differences you have with them. You'll find that you're very much similar, whether in ideology, political views, or financial status with your best friends. And that is why you're friends. So if you drink, chances are some of your friends drink. If you smoke, chances are some of your friends smoke.
I was hanging around with the wrong people. I was in a gang. I was getting into fights. I was, smoking cigarettes and all that stuff. And one time, both mom and dad, had to go to the police station to bail me out.
One of the reasons why the rich avoid the poor is because even if they try to spend time around the poor, they'll probably end up not having anything to discuss. One of them probably has an internal locus of control, while the other has an external locus of control. One of them probably thinks it's a sin to buy a car of $200,000, while the other thinks it's not. One of them probably thinks the next president of his country should solve his personal problem, while the other thinks it won't happen. This leads us to the third reason why the rich could avoid the poor. On page 21 of his 1958 book, The Psychology of Interpersonal Relation, Fritz Heider wrote, "Unlike objects, people are usually perceived as action centers and as such can do something to us. They can benefit or harm us intentionally, and we can benefit or harm them. While many of the rich may genuinely want to socialize and spend time with the poor, it's almost impossible to do so." Let me share a personal experience with you. I have this friend who is very smart, smarter than me in many ways, but he's poor. Since I respect him as a person, especially because of his intelligence, I try to visit him and spend time around him. But our time together always ends in some ugly feelings about each other. We hardly ever agree on anything. For example, in one of our last meetings, he talked about how our neighboring country has better opportunities than ours. I disagreed because I don't believe that opportunities are a factor of location, but a factor of the mind. He would always blame the government, while I always talk about fixing our lives by ourselves. My friend hates it whenever I talked about my dreams because deep within him, buying such a house or driving such a car as I want is too sinful, worldly, or better yet, impossible.
Things. You can't do it. Why?
You get the idea. Another reason why rich people often avoid the poor is that most poor people have a negative mindset. They hope someone else solves their problems, blame someone else for their lives, and think wealth is evil. So, in conclusion, the first reason why many rich people may avoid the poor is that money tends to make the rich feel entitled, feel smarter than the poor, or feel that they deserve what they have, and others deserve poverty too. But it doesn't end there. The second reason why the rich might avoid the poor is that, well, humans naturally associate with people who are like them. The third reason is that poor people are usually negative. They often speak ill of wealth, blame others for their lives, and take less responsibility. Thanks for watching.